So as you guys might notice, there's 3 presenters up on the screen, but only 2 of us here right now. So Dr. Jennifer Mead will be joining us. She's just finishing up with a patient. And so, but I'm Dr. Ann Zotter, and this is Dr. Ola Burr. And today we're going to be talking about weight loss, which is kind of an interesting subject, a very poignant subject, I think, for a lot of people. And hopefully today, what we'll talk about, we're going to give kind of a broad overview of different perspectives on weight loss. And so what we've kind of designed is we are going to try and talk less and let you guys ask more questions. So we've each prepared about 10 or 15 minutes to talk about, and hopefully that will spark some ideas, some questions, and write them down. And then at the end, we'll have hopefully about 20 to 25 minutes for you guys to ask the questions that you really want to hear about. And so, the approach we take with weight loss, why this is called an individualized approach is similar to everything we do here at the Riordan Clinic, where we're looking for the root cause. I don't know how many people have had the experience of going on a diet and that diet not working. Statistically, most people, will gain back the weight they lost when they did a, quote, diet. And if not just getting that weight back, typically they'll actually gain more weight back after the fact. And so hopefully what we're going to be presenting to you guys today is the Riordan Clinic approach to looking for the root cause of why do we gain weight to begin with? Why do we have an obesity epidemic? And what can we make changes in with our lifestyle to actually, make sustainable changes, not just kind of a quick Band-Aid sort of fix. So, one of the kind of forefront leaders, researchers in this field is a doctor named Dr. David Ludwig. And I love this quote that he gives us. He says, "Overeating doesn't make you fat. The process of getting fat makes you overeat." And that kind of seems like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially after Dr. Ola talks. That will make a lot more sense, because really it's more kind of the hormonal changes that happen when we eat poor quality foods that lead us to gaining weight. And so it's really that process that leads to gaining weight, not necessarily just eating too many calories. Because, we've been told that weight loss is this calorie in, calorie out model. That if we're gaining weight, it's either because we're eating too much or we're not exercising enough. And, that's a really convenient model for the food industry to adopt and to push on us, because then they have no responsibility. They can sell us whatever sort of junk food they want, and if we gain weight when we eat it, it's our fault because we ate too much of it or we just didn't exercise enough. But in reality, it's more important the quality of food that we're eating rather than the quantity. And when you're eating the right types of foods, that's going to set up the environment in the body where your body is going to be able to burn the calories that you eat. So that's kind of where we're headed. I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Ola, and she's going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of these hormones that do change when we eat poor quality foods.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I want to talk about 3 hormones: leptin, insulin, and ghrelin. I want to just give us a little bit of an overview so that we kind of understand what they are and what kind of role they play inside our bodies. The 2 major hormones that are recognized as really affecting our energy, our metabolism, our appetite are ghrelin and leptin. I think a lot of us have heard about insulin. However, maybe not much information is yet known to the general public about ghrelin and leptin. These hormones have been are relatively new. We really started identifying them in the mid-1990s, so it's not like we've known about them for decades. A lot of research has been done on those 2 hormones, and we're trying to learn more about how they cause us to gain weight, keep weight on, and have a hard time to lose excess storage. So I want to start with ghrelin. Ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone, so it increases our appetite. And then leptin is quite the opposite. It suppresses our appetite and helps us feel satiated and full. So with ghrelin, when our stomach is empty, when we haven't eaten and it's time for lunch or dinner, we start like feeling quite hungry. So that hunger sensation is ghrelin being secreted from our stomach, entering our blood circulation, going into our brain and telling our brain, hey, you're hungry, you should start eating now. When we start eating and over time our stomach will stretch and get full, we'll make less ghrelin. And those signals of hunger will die down and be dampened down. Ghrelin also helps us secrete stomach acid. It helps us have good gastrointestinal motility. So it really just jump starts the digestion process. So levels of ghrelin are high right before meals, and then they go down right after we eat. So the opposite of ghrelin is leptin. And leptin suppresses our desire to want to eat more. And it also stimulates metabolism. It stimulates energy expenditure. So it helps our fat cells start mobilizing that stored fat, utilizing it, and getting rid of it. So overall, leptin says we have enough food stored now as energy, and we can expend it on other pursuits and not just acquiring more food. Leptin is produced in our fat tissue. The more fat tissue we have, the more leptin we make. What we're seeing over time, what we're seeing now, researchers are identifying that as people tend to be overweight or obese, their levels of leptin are very high, ghrelin levels are low. They're seeing that the brain is no longer responding to leptin cues and signals. It's not receiving that message of you're full, stop eating. So we're seeing an overweight and obese population that people tend to have leptin resistance, and what happens is people tend to crave more carbohydrates and tend to crave more sugars and sweets, and those cravings occur throughout the day and even peak and rise later into the evenings. And we're finding that no matter how hard people try to lose the weight, they're just not able to mobilize those fat stores. There's some hypotheses as why this is happening, why leptin resistance is manifesting. So researchers are thinking maybe it's chronic inflammation in our body, maybe it's high levels of inappropriate fats, higher levels of triglycerides are accumulating, and they're just not letting leptin enter through the blood-brain barrier, go into our central nervous system and act on that hypothalamus gland to send signals to say, you're getting full, you can stop eating now. We're finding that poor food choices, largely contributed by the major food industries, contributing to this, making our hormones be out of whack. So those poor food choices include high fructose corn syrup that's saturated our food market in massive amounts, just pure white sugar, or refined and enriched flours, or hydrogenated oils and trans fats. These break this communication network in our brain. We're also seeing that, so these are just a list of foods that are, in our grocery stores, in our packaged shelf-stable, highly palatable food-like products that, as we consume them, lower ghrelin, so increase ghrelin, so we're not satiated. We stay hungry when we consume these foods, and they are contributing to this disarray of communication hormonally in our body. So a few other things to really pay attention to is sleep deprivation. So if we even have one night of poor sleep, less than 6 hours of sleep, ghrelin goes up, so we get hungry fast, we get hungry in a strong way, and we may not be fully satiated when we do eat. And the same happens with stress. So if we're not coping with stressors in our life very well, ghrelin levels stay up and we stay hungry longer, more often. So the key to a a weight loss regimen, a weight loss program, is you have to really have good, healthy sleep hygiene, sleeping 7 to 9 hours every night, and really managing stress levels. We cannot stress that enough. So I want to also mention insulin. And so insulin is another hormone that helps regulate our metabolism, and it helps, in the storage of sugar and fat in our body. So it is made in the pancreas, and it's usually secreted when we eat food. We notice that the higher the sugar content of our food, we tend to make more insulin. So sugar cannot enter our cells directly. Insulin is the key that opens the lock, that allows the blood sugar to enter the cells. When sugar levels stay high in our body, we become hyperglycemic, so high blood glucose levels over a period of time that can turn into prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. We're finding that insulin resistance also happens, kind of like a leptin resistance, when insulin is being secreted into our bloodstream, but it's not binding with the cell receptor, and sugar can't enter cells. It just keeps accumulating in our bloodstream, in a place where we really don't want it to be for long periods of time. Insulin is kind of a fat storage hormone. So it helps us store these energy reserve and doesn't allow us to utilize it. So we're finding that, like, if we're eating 3 meals a day, maybe snacks between, if those foods include, foods with high fructose corn syrup or a lot of refined white sugar or a lot of simple carbohydrates like refined and enriched white flours. If we're eating these meals continuously throughout the day, our insulin levels are staying high all the time. Our body's in storage mode. We're not releasing these fat stores. We're holding on to them and keeping them in our body longer and longer. So I know Dr. Ann and Dr. Kay are going to talk a little bit more about how we can biohack this, how we can reverse this, what we can do to kind of fix these pathways that have gone awry through our lifestyle and our food choices.
I'm back. So what I'm going to talk about is just going to absolutely build on what Dr. Ola just talked about and look at, how do we know how to biohack these hormones, and how do we know how to change, some of these patterns? How do we know what patterns we're in? And so the most important thing I can teach, and I love this quote: the food that you eat can either be the safest, most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And like Dr. Ola alluded to, a lot of the foods that are poison in our world today are foods that we are getting, the highly processed foods that we're getting at the grocery store. And, I read a really great quote here recently where somebody asked the question, why are organic foods and health foods so expensive? And the response to that is, it's not that those foods are so expensive. We really should be asking, why are all the processed foods so cheap? And when you look at it from that perspective, when you're using a lot of cheap ingredients, the best way to make cheap ingredients taste good is to add a lot of cheap oils to it or a lot of cheap sugar. So high fructose corn syrup and hydrogenated oils, that's the cheapest way to make poor quality food tastes good. So that's what a lot of the food, I don't even want to call it food, the food-like substances that we're eating today, that's what a lot of those are. They're cheap ingredients in their cheap foods. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is how do we shift away from eating a lot of those foods, and what do some of those foods do to our body? And so to kind of understand that, and to build on, like I said, what Dr. Ola was saying with some of the hormones, one thing you have to understand about metabolism and you have to understand about our bodies is we really kind of have two different forms of metabolism in the body. And the analogy I use is we have two different engines in the body, and when you put in carbohydrates, you're feeding the carbohydrate burning engine, versus if you eat fats, you're going to be feeding your fat burning engine. So we've got these kind of two dual mechanisms, which when you look historically at our ancestors, it makes sense, because the ancestral hunter-gatherer sort of diet was mostly a fat-based diet. It was mostly fats, mostly proteins, and carbohydrates weren't as readily available, not nearly at the levels that we have available today. And so for us, when you look at these two engines, there's a couple kind of differences between the two. Kind of the basic rule is you can't use both engines at the same time. So you're not going to be burning fats and carbohydrates at the same time, if you look at it at a very basic level. And what we do is our body will always default to burning sugar first. So if we give the body carbohydrates and we give it sugar, even if we're giving it at the same time we're giving fats, body's going to burn that sugar and those carbohydrates, and it's going to store the fat. Because when you look at our carbohydrate burning engine, it's quick energy, which, again, for our ancestors that didn't have access to this was a huge advantage to have kind of that quick influx of energy. So it's to their advantage to use this engine first. But you can kind of think about when you're using this carbohydrate burning engine all the time, this was made for a quick burn. It wasn't made for, long sustainable sorts of energy. This was a quick burn, and there's more kind of toxic byproduct associated with using carbohydrates as your primary fuel. And one of the biggest points is if you're constantly using carbohydrates as your fuel, when you run out of carbohydrates, you are constantly going to have to refuel your engine. Your body, when you run out of sugar, like Dr. Ola talked about, when you run out of sugar in the blood, that's, if you've eaten a really high carbohydrate meal, that's that crash you get a couple hours later with blood sugar. And I'll talk about that here in a second. But when we don't have a constant source of carbohydrates, and that's mostly what we're eating, as soon as we run out of sugar in the blood, and as soon as we kind of run out of the stored glycogen in the liver, the body starts initiating all of those mechanisms to say, I'm hungry, I need more. And typically that crash happens so fast that what the first thing we reach for is another source of quick energy, which is more sugar and more carbohydrates. So what that looks like is if you look at blood sugar levels, when we eat high glycemic foods or high sugar foods, this is what happens. That blood sugar goes up really, really fast. Insulin kicks in right here, starts pulling that out, and then we drop really, really fast. And so when we actually drop this low, when we get hypoglycemic, that's that you get really shaky, you get a headache, you get hungry. You'll pretty much eat anything that anybody puts in front of you. So this sort of roller coaster pattern is not only hard on the body and hard on some of these hormones, but it feeds into this cycle of constantly being hungry and constantly needing to eat. Versus when you have foods that are low glycemic, like foods that are high in good fats, when we're feeding our fat burning engine, what happens is those get broken down a lot more slowly, and they release the energy a lot more slowly, so we stay full for a longer period of time, and so we're not as hungry. So this could be the difference. If this is breakfast right here, if we have for breakfast, say, Dunkin' Donuts, which is especially if you add a sugar coffee on top of that, you could have the exact same number of calories as having scrambled eggs with an entire avocado. But the Dunkin' Donuts, you're going to burn through that, and you're going to tank, a couple hours later, versus that high fat, high protein breakfast is going to sustain you a lot longer, and you're not going to be as hungry. And the other big point with that is when we're in this kind of high roller coasters, we're releasing a lot of insulin to help the body deal with that blood sugar. And so just like Dr. Ola said, when we're in a high insulin state, then the body is going to be, constantly looking for sugar. We're going to be storing a lot of the excess that we don't need versus burning it. So when you look at the fat burning engine, which is our alternate form of metabolism, this is what kicks in when we don't have a lot of access to carbohydrates. When this fat burning engine kicks in, this is where the body, it's more of kind of a sustainable source of fuel. So we can eat, good quality fats. The body can break that down and turn it into a form of energy. Now, what's beautiful about this sort of an engine is when we run out of fuel, unlike carbohydrates, the body can seamlessly transition into pulling stored fat, and turning that into energy. So as we keep a lot of those hormones low, and as we're able to kind of seamlessly transition from the fat we've eaten in the diet to the fat that we're pulling, our blood sugar is going to stay a lot more steady, and we're not going to be as hungry, and it's going to those reduced insulin levels are going to help increase our sensitivity to leptin, and we're going to burn the stored fat that we have a lot easier. So ideally, we would want to stay as much as we can in our fat burning state. And does anybody know, every single one of us, or almost all of us, go into this fat burning mode at least once a day. Does anybody know when that is? Sleeping, exactly. Yep, when we go to sleep at night, because we're asleep for hopefully at least 8 hours at night, and so typically it takes about 4 to 5 hours to burn through all of the sugar that we have, either in the bloodstream or that's stored. And so every night we should go into this fat burning mode. That's why breakfast is such an important meal, because you're breaking that overnight fast, and you're waking up more in this fat burning mode. That's why they say exercise is really good in the morning, because you're in that fat burning mode, and when you exercise, you tend to burn more of that stored fat. This is also why breakfast is a really important meal of the day, because if you eat a really high carbohydrate breakfast, not only are you putting yourself on that roller coaster ride, but you're also, going to disrupt that fat burning, and you're going to switch into your carbohydrate burning engine. So in looking at our ancestors, they primarily lived in their fat burning mode because they didn't have access to carbohydrates. So for us, kind of shifting back to that mode as much as possible would be to our advantage, especially if we want to stay lean. So a couple of diets I'm going to go through quickly since I'm taking a lot of time here. A couple of diets that kind of emphasize this sort of eating pattern that I wanted to touch on, because they're kind of big, in the news right now, is the paleo diet. And, a paleo diet is emphasizing, real food. You're taking out a lot of grains, you're taking out sugars, you're taking out dairy out of the diet, which is essentially leaving you with, a pretty low carbohydrate, sort of diet. And it's also a very anti-inflammatory sort of diet. So, just like Dr. Ola talked about, inflammation can be a trigger for some of these, this hormonal dysregulation that we get. And so getting back to eating, it's really, the paleo diet is really just eating real food. It's eating a lot of, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, protein. It's a very anti-inflammatory sort of diet. Now, if you take the paleo diet one step further, you can actually do what's called the ketogenic diet. And I don't know if anybody's heard about this. There isn't kind of a one-size-fits-all, and I've had patients that do really, really great on a ketogenic diet and patients that do really, really bad on a ketogenic diet. And this is where you're getting upwards to 60, sometimes people even push it upwards to 80% of the diet from a good fat source. So most of your calories are coming from, avocados, coconut oil, a lot of nuts and seeds, olive oil, a lot of the good healthy oils. That's where you get a lot of your calories. And interestingly enough, one thing I didn't mention about your fat burning engine is research has shown that it actually has somewhat of a neuroprotective effect for us. So if you've got a family history of some sort of neurodegenerative condition, eating a higher fat ketogenic / paleo sort of diet might be beneficial for you. And it's actually, the ketogenic diet was actually developed and first utilized in kids that had seizure disorders. So it would help stop, the seizures. And it's been shown to be good for stuff like Parkinson's. And so in cancer, sometimes, starving the cancer cells, ketogenic diet's been used successfully with that as well. And then the last thing I want to talk about, again, just because this is a big conversation in the news right now, is something called intermittent fasting. Has anybody heard about that a little bit? So the intermittent fasting is this idea that you go through for periods, anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, where you do kind of like a mini fast, which, again, looking back ancestrally, our ancestors didn't have, 24-hour access to food like we do today. And in fact, our biochemistry actually benefits greatly from going through periods where we don't eat. In a sense, you give the digestive system a break, you help re-regulate the metabolism. So intermittent fasting is used where, typically people do it maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Some of my patients will do it just during the work week, Monday through Friday. But essentially, you stop eating, say at 8 o'clock at night, and then you don't eat again until the next day at noon. And so now the key with this is if you do it, you can't break your fast, having McDonald's for lunch, that next day. You've got to break your fast, keeping yourself kind of in that fat burning mode. So break that fast with really good high fat, high protein, high fiber sort of meal. But you end up eating the same amount of calories as you would have eaten over the course of the day. You just eat them over a shorter period of time. You eat it from about 12 o'clock in the afternoon to about 8 o'clock at night. And I put on here, this can be really beneficial for weight loss for a lot of people because it can affect your insulin levels. If you've been in a high insulin resistant sort of state, this is kind of a nice way to break that cycle and help reduce insulin levels. It can help with increasing production of human growth hormone, which that's the hormone that keeps us lean. That's the hormone that tanks after the age of 30. That's why it's so much harder to stay lean and, as we age. It's great for repairing of the cells, and then there's some gene expression that also changes, when you go through periods of fasting. So this is another way. The only caution I give with this is, if you are diabetic or you do run really high blood sugars, I would do this sort of fasting under the care of a doctor because, if your blood sugar is too dysregulated, this can put a little bit of extra stress on the body. And so, all right, so that's all I've got. And so I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Jen. She's going to talk about HCG.
So I'm supposed to be talking about the HCG diet and go into details about that. Dr. Ola and Dr. Ann did a great job of talking about the science of hormones and weight loss. I kind of want to take a little bit of a step back and do just kind of talk about more of the art, I guess, of weight loss. And how it really is an individualized approach, and everyone needs to understand that. At the end of the day, you have to look at every person different because we're all completely different. So I want to first start off by explaining what metabolism is. Basically, metabolism is just all the chemical reactions going on in your body that are keeping you alive. So we tend to think of metabolism as fat loss and weight loss and, drink more water, increase your metabolism. Eat more fat or coconut oil, increase your metabolism. But basically, metabolism is just all the chemistry going on. And weight loss and fat loss is a teeny tiny bit of the metabolism. So that being said, your metabolism is very, inflexible and flexible. It's adaptive and reactive at the same time. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to explain is your metabolism's main job, more than anything, is to keep you alive, keep you healthy, protect you from stress, keep you at homeostasis all the time. And, even when we are in a disease state, a lot of times, our metabolism is protecting us. It's hard to grasp and understand, but even when you are making a lot of triglycerides and you're storing fat, you have high triglycerides, the doctor's saying, you need to lower your triglycerides, you need to lose weight. Your body is doing that to actually protect you. Because if you didn't store the sugar as triglycerides and store it as fat, it is causing problems. It may cause a heart attack in 40 years, but you could have an aneurysm in a year, basically, if it didn't do that. So, the point is, I want you to understand that the metabolism is doing these things for a reason. And you have to gradually shift the metabolism. So Okay, let me further explain what I'm talking about. So one thing that a lot of people do is they, and something I've been taught long ago when I was in leadership courses and stuff, if you want to be successful, look to people that have been successful and repeat what they're doing, right? Try to figure out, and that's what a lot of people do. They look at, trainers and athletes, and they try to do what they're doing, and that's great, but you want to duplicate, not imitate, kind of how I put it. So, if you are a couch potato, for instance, and I don't mean just laying on the couch watching TV, but a lot of us that sit all day at work and we're behind a computer and we are busy all day and we're productive, we're still kind of couch potatoes. If we go out and, we go out to on the border for lunch, come back to work, and, we're eating a lot and we're sitting. We're in the couch potato metabolism. And if that's the way we're trained, our metabolism, you can't say on Monday, I'm gonna start doing intermittent fasting and I'm gonna go to the gym and work out an hour every day. It's not gonna work. You're going to basically, you're going to do great through breakfast and lunch, and then you're going to get home at 5 o'clock, and you're going to have what I call the endless meal. You start eating at 5, and you eat until you go to bed, and then you beat yourself up, and you have low self-esteem because you're not fitting your goals, and then you try to do it again, and then you just throw your hands up in the air because you're miserable, you're having headaches, you're having all these problems, and whatnot. So you have to understand that to get there, it is an art and it is a journey. And there's not just one diet. People say, what diet should I eat? Should I be paleo? Should I do intermittent fasting? Should I do? And it all depends on where you are, where your metabolism is, where you are in your disease state. Because all that plays a role, and you have to take a gradual shift over time. So if you're the couch potato eating 3 meals a day and lots of snacks, well, then you just need to start changing those meals around and still eating snacks during the day, because if you start intermittent fasting, you're going to have more side effects. A healthy metabolism can fast. You look at a child, okay? They can go all day and not eat because they're playing and they're having fun and they do fine. And a healthy metabolism can. So if you can't, that's not a healthy metabolism, but you can try to train yourself over time to get there. So you want to duplicate, not imitate, I guess is the take home of that slide. I'm missing some slides, but, this is out of order. Ha, 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 there it is. That was what I was going to talk about, discussion on metabolism and how HCG can assist and all that stuff. Sorry. So basically, I like the rubber band analogy with this. So if and some people are different. You can go a month with being a couch potato and you've frozen your metabolism. It's like putting a rubber band in ice water. If you go and try to stretch a rubber band after it's been frozen, what's going to happen? It's going to break. So basically, you can't go out and run 4 miles. The worst people are the ones that used to do it. I used to do that, or I've been out taking care of mom and dad for a year, and I've been out, and so I want to, get back to running and eating the way I was. You still need to take that gradual approach. So this is not just for people that are overweight. These are for sick people, for people who are pregnant. Don't go run a marathon right away. Because you really kind of need to take that step-by-step approach. Now, there are people out there that can do it. There are people, for sure, out there that can go out on Monday morning, start exercising and diet, and they do fine, they lose weight. Usually they're younger. Usually they're in their 20s, maybe early 30s, maybe. Usually in their 20s they're doing that, and some people still later can do it, but majority of people can't. They need to take that step-by-step approach. So there's a danger in pushing your inflexible metabolism. If you push it too hard, you're going to get sick. You're going to get injured. You're going to pull your rotator cuff, your ACL, all those things. You want to be very careful. You don't want to go from one stressful situation to another that quick, okay? Yeah.
I have a comment.
Sure.
Did anybody see the New York Times article that came out like last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago on The Biggest Loser? And how, The Biggest Loser, the whole premise is they put him through this extreme weight loss, extreme dieting. This is exactly what Jenny's talking about. These people were very unhealthy, very overweight, and they pushed them to an extreme. And what they found out was most of them, after the show, gained the weight back. And not only did they gain the weight back, some of them gained more, but when they measured their basal metabolic rate, it was about 500 to 600 calories less than what it should have been for somebody of their size, age, and weight. And so their metabolism fought back really, really strongly to that extreme stress that they put them under. So that's exactly what what you're talking about.
So like I said, Ann just said, the research tells us 95% of those sort of diet mentalities fail, or they lose the weight and then they gain it back and more. You probably all have heard that. And so I already said this. This is true for people that are overweight post-pregnancy. You know, I always hear all the time, I've been stressed, my mom's been sick, I took a year off. You know, people try to get back into doing things, and they can't do it the way they do it, and they did it, and they get frustrated. And so the point here is you can't go from A to Z in a jump. You know, we try to make that plan, and it doesn't work that way. So there's always a step-by-step approach. Like, you need to eat this way for a while, and then we'll reevaluate how things are going. Then we'll change and do it this way for a while. So you need to go from point A to F to M to U to Z. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the best way to change your metabolism, okay? Because that's what we want to do to lose weight. To really lose weight and keep it off and get us healthy. So most people just don't get it, that. They don't know that. We're in that the mentality of, how can I do this quickly? We all want to do it quickly, but we didn't gain weight as quick as we think we did. Usually it's 10 pounds a year or 10, 15 pounds a year. Over the course of a decade, that's 100 pounds. I mean, it does creep on very slow. So the HCG program, so how does this fit into all of this? So the simple explanation of the HCG program and how I feel it can play a role into shifting your metabolism. I've been doing the visits with patients since, I think, 2012. I can't remember exactly. So for about 4 years. So I've learned a lot by guiding patients through this program, and it's been a great experience for me. But for one, it's not a magic bullet. You know, it's not that magic pill you're looking for. It works 99.9% of the time if you do it. It's a great program. But basically what the program is assisting in is it's a quicker way of going from a fat storing metabolism to a fat burning, kind of, so to speak. So from a very inflexible metabolism to a flexible metabolism. And the HCG program is just using the human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. So that's the pregnancy hormone. So when you're pregnant and you do a pregnancy test, that's what they're checking for. But basically, this program, or the HCG, was found to have part of what the HCG hormone does is when a pregnant woman is going through a famine, that the HCG helps utilize the visceral fats for stores for energy production for the pregnant woman and the fetus. So it's kind of a protection survival mechanism. And the visceral fat is kind of all the abdominal, belly, thigh fat that we don't like. And it's really hard to get rid of because our body usually in the very first stages of weight loss wants to get rid of structural fat, like the fat under your skin and the fat we don't really want to lose. So visceral fat does come off without HCG. It just takes a longer time. This program helps move things more quickly. So basically, if you're giving a small amount of HCG to a patient, Dr. Simeons in the 1950s is the doctor that did the research on this, but we're giving about 125 IUs daily. The infertility, I forgot to mention, they also use this for infertility, but they're giving 5 to 10,000 IUs a day. So you're just giving a little bit for the HCG weight loss program. You get a little bit, but it has to be accompanied with a low-calorie diet because HCG obviously doesn't cause weight loss. I mean, we'd see all these pregnant women losing weight. It's not what it does, and it's not tricking your body to think you're pregnant. It's just, if you combine it with a low-calorie diet, it helps your body mobilize visceral fat to make up for the calorie deficit. So you don't really go into starvation mode when you're on the HCG program, if you're using the real hormone, okay? Yeah, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. A very low-calorie diet is it's part of the HCG program, and I have that on here. I'm going to show you. Let me actually jump to that. So the very low-calorie diet, while you're on it, well, first of all, there's 4 parts of this program, and the first part is 2 days of loading, and you eat, drink, be merry, kind of what I say, for 2 days. So you eat a lot of fat, especially. So you need to have a lot of fat and then very little fat for a while. Okay, so you have a feast and a famine. That stimulates the HCG to work. It's kind of like that sudden drop in intake is how that HCG really starts working. So the first few days are loading, and then you go through 38 or 21 days of a very low-calorie diet. And The very low calorie diet is basically 2 meals a day, 4 ounces of a protein, 2 cups of a vegetable, a fruit, and a breadstick. Okay. It actually, a lot of patients, when they start doing it, they're like, I really can't eat all this food. It is more than you think. And there's specific vegetables and specific proteins, and there's reasons behind those. But yes, you have a question?
Some people don't think that low calories is healthy.
That's right, and that's the difference of this is not just a low-calorie diet, because what the HCG is doing is it's mobilizing the visceral fat for fuel to make up for the deficit in calories that you're needing to sustain your metabolism, and so you're not going into starvation mode that low-calorie diets would do. So you should not get headaches, you should not get dizziness, lightheadedness, all those symptoms. I mean, maybe in the first 2 or 3 days some people do, but you should not experience a lot of that. You might get growling in your stomach, but that's a different hormonal thing. That's just because your body's used to having food. But you shouldn't have the real signals of hunger and starvation. And this is coupled with no exercise. Yep. And you don't do a lot of exercise, because if you do too much exercise, that's one mistake people make. Then they go into starvation mode because you're burning too much. So I usually tell patients, we need to kind of be, if we're sitting all day like I do for the most part at my desk, then if you want to walk a mile, probably fine, mile or two at a slow, casual walk. But other than that, you don't really do much exercise while you're on this program. It's kind of a eat less, exercise less program in the very beginning. Like I said, this is not like something you're going to sustain long term, but it's a way to kind of shift you a little bit quicker from fat storing to fat burning, because people want to see, and people get frustrated, they give up if they're not losing weight quick enough. So this does help self-esteem and help confidence and help people stick to their changes. So basically it's 40 days or 38 days of the low calorie, and then you go through this transition 3-day transition phase. And then the most important part of this program is not the weight loss or the HCG phase, but the most important part is how you're introducing the foods back. So I have it set up where there's 3 2-week segments, and you're gradually adding foods back in. And I do it a little differently based on the patient's history and where they are and their metabolism, and I kind of give them a little bit different directions. I mean, if some people have a more healthier metabolism, we might implement some intermittent fasting quicker, but for the most part, I kind of change it up, and it's very simple.
How long is the transition phase?
It's 3 days. It's just a transition off HCG. It's the same very low calorie diet, and no HCG on those 3 days. So the body processes out the HCG. And then it's 3 2-week segments, and I really help during these 3 2 weeks. I make sure people understand what's going on. This is a lifestyle change. This is understanding how they need to eat, how to combine foods, all the things Dr. Ann talked about and Dr. Ola. I try to kind of use all of that to help patients decide how they need to be eating, their art of moving forward in their weight loss, getting healthy journey. So let's see. And some people, paleo's a great diet, and there's some people I have them do some grains a couple times a day, because that's what they're needing. That's what their metabolism is needing, and we're all very different. So symptoms on this program, you don't get the typical starvation symptoms because of the fact that it is mobilizing the visceral fat for fuel. You should.
Part is fat to lose.
Yep. It doesn't slow your metabolism down. I have this on the slide. You actually get everything you're needing from a calorie standpoint. We also give people vitamin packets that they take with the program to assure that they're getting all the essential vitamins and minerals. And a lot of patients, in all reality, they're even without the vitamin packs, they're getting more nutrition than they were before the program. When I look at diets, I see people go weeks without a vegetable. And they think they're eating healthy. They're avoiding the bad stuff. I call it we have a bad diet over here, a good diet over here, and a not a bad diet here, where you're not eating fast food and soda, but you're not getting all the good stuff. And so a lot of people don't realize that. When we get to maintenance, and I tell patients, you still need to get 4 cups of vegetables in a day. You were doing that before. That's a minimum. And so we work on doing that, because if you can't get that in, you're going to revert back to putting other carbs and dairy in the place of the vegetables, and that's not a good thing. So So no, does not slow your metabolism down. So most women lose about a half to 7.75 pounds per day on the very low calorie phase. Men 0.75 to 1 on average, and 1 to 3 in maintenance lifestyle renewal. That's usually the weight loss. If someone's really morbidly obese, I mean, they could lose 2 to 3 pounds a day in the very early beginning. They do lose a lot of water weight. That's okay. That's inflammation weight. You're inflamed, you swell, you have water retention. You want to start losing that. That's okay. But we're losing fat and not muscle. That's what we're trying to do. So, and then I talked about the exercise already. I have people, 20 minutes of light exercise, but I have some of those hardcore exercisers that have a hard time getting this mentality of eat less, exercise less in the beginning. But it works. So let's see. If you have more questions, I put on, our website. We have all sorts of videos and stuff. Dr. Ron's talking. I didn't even know he had videoed those until I went the other day. I saw. They're great little videos you can watch. We also have the doctor call time. You can always call in on Wednesdays. I do. All the other doctors do the call times as well. I do them on Wednesdays, 5:36. You can call and ask questions.
Yeah, thank you. There was a study that was done where they compared diet soda drinkers to regular soda drinkers. Like diet to regular, not diet to nothing, diet to regular. And the diet soda drinkers gained 30% more visceral fat over a certain period. And so the aspartame and all those artificial sweeteners disrupt your gut flora, and they'll kill your gut flora, and that leads to not only a lot of other issues, but weight gain being one of them. And
Well, I'm the IT guy, but my background's biochemistry, and I did go through the HCG program, and I want to share a recipe for those of you who might be gluten intolerant or have children that are. I was doing it in the wintertime, so we like chicken soup, chicken noodle soup. Well, bad for gluten, also bad for carbs. I found even my kids, all but one, would eat it. I took cabbage and sliced it thin, measured out my 2 cups, and then boiled my chicken and added my cabbage, so still a little bit crisp, but it was a great way to get the chicken soup flavor without the carbs of the wheat. So, and it tastes about like the regular thing. You get a little bit of a hint of cabbage flavor, but you can season it the way you like it, and it's a great option as opposed to throwing the noodles in there, especially those store-bought egg noodles and what have you.
Almost any vegetable, really.
Yeah.
You still have the chicken.
And I added things like celery and carrots to make it a little prettier, or you could add the red cabbage and then everything looks purple, but being a K-State fan, that didn't bother me either. But your chicken looks purple too.
well, thank you guys so much for coming.